music is this kind of great equalizer, because if you are serious and you sort of surrender to all the lessons that it can teach you, then it doesn't really matter where you end up on this continuum, because it's like this, it's sort of this great life discipline, almost like a spiritual discipline. It's just something that you do.
That was Anthony Wilson, the outstanding guitarist, composer, and arranger, and sideman to many, many big-name musicians. He and I have a deep conversation in this episode. Keep on listening. 2, 3, 4. Hey, podcast people, John here. You're listening to Make Moves, episode 12, part 1. Technically speaking, this is the very last episode of season 1 of this show. However, it is so full of interesting conversation and great music that I decided to stretch it out into 2 parts so we could extend the glow just a little bit longer. As already mentioned, I'm talking with Anthony Wilson in this episode. He is a tremendously impressive musician. He's Los Angeles based, but he plays globally with all kinds of people, as you will hear. This interview surprised me a little bit. It's not that I didn't expect Anthony to be a super deep guy. It's just that somehow, I'm not quite sure how yet, we wound up having some really deep conversation. We talked some real technicalities about music. We talked about family relationships. We talked about really a lot of stuff. And it was a real pleasure for me to have this talk. This episode's sprinkled with a lot of Anthony's music. I hope you'll dig it. I sure do. I'll check in with you about the halfway point, and also I will share some stuff with you at the end of part 1. Until then, I'm going to turn off my mic. You turn on your ears and keep on listening. Hey, Anthony, thanks for coming on Make Moves.
Thanks so much, John. I'm so glad to be here to talk with you.
Man, it's super cool. I thought I'd give the audience out there just a little bit of a summary about how you came on my radar before I get to some questions. But I really appreciate your time. So indulge me in the audience while I get to tell this little story. I grew up in the suburbs of LA, and I used to hit the sort of the rotating guitar nights. It was usually hosted at some restaurant somewhere in the San Fernando Valley or something like that. And I always heard my guitar buddies talking about this young gun, Anthony Wilson. And at the time, I was sort of like halfway toying with being a real guitar player, and I was trying to learn about jazz and the beauty of harmony, and I was checking everybody out. But back then, all those guys were older than me. And then you came along, and because I was young and insecure, I couldn't quite bring myself to go hear you play. I think I was kind of afraid like how good you would be, which would kind of underscore how good maybe that I wasn't. And
excuse me, also just to interrupt quickly. How old are you, if you don't mind telling your audience?
Yeah, I'm 44.
You're 44.
Yeah.
So you're younger than I am. So you had some older cats talking about me, but you're actually a few, because I'm 48.
Yeah. Well, just a few years. I mean, but so your name would always come up in conversations like with John Paisano, and like he was one of my dad's contemporaries. And
sure.
that just scared the shit out of me, because you were like, this guy who was somewhere around my age, and you played with grown-ups. And I couldn't even believe that.
Well, I've always liked to hang out with people that are like 40 years older than me. That's like always been a thing, my best friend, Ben, loves to say that, like, he's like, man, when we were 20, you had like 80-year-old friends. Like, that was like my life, I just loved old school, I guess. I don't know.
Well, yeah. So anyway, somewhere around the year 2000, I left LA, and I started my non-music career, and I got hitched and had kids. And I guess you were working your ass off recording and composing and being a sideman and all that. And so now we're in 2016. I guess I'll just ask you, 16 years later, like, how many albums have you recorded as a leader at this point? Do you even have a count?
I do, because it's sort of part of what you have to do in order to market your albums to people is, when it's your next album, you say, this is Anthony Wilson's 10th album, which so the album that I just put out this year was Frogtown, which is my 10th album. Although I think it's my 10th album. Yeah, I think it's the 10th one. So I have 9 that were done in the studio, and then I have one that was a live album. But yeah, so 10 of them.
Okay. And so I think except for your most recent album, haven't they all been instrumental albums?
They've all been instrumental. I did one album with my 9-piece band about already 10 years ago. It's crazy how the time flies, in which Diana Krall sang one song. But otherwise, yeah, pretty much putting out my own music. I had done all instrumental music, and that's what I concentrated on for the longest time.
And so, but like, what is the range? Like, I know you did some Brazilian stuff and, like this nonette stuff. Like what all kind of stuff have you done? Yeah,
well, at the time that I first was given the opportunity to record, I was working here in LA and concentrating on building up a book of music for a 9-piece band. I just really loved the sound of guitar with a small horn section. And it was something that I felt that I could do and that was sort of feasible to do. It was something that I could actually go and do gigs fairly easily. We're looking at around the time 1996, 1997, 98. And, I wanted to do gigs, and I had thought about having a big band, but my father is also a big band leader, and I was a bit wary of doing the exact same thing that my father did. I just wanted to differentiate myself in a way. And I was also really, really inspired by recordings that I listened to of kind of guitar players playing with horn sections, people like B.B. King and T-Bone Walker playing with these kind of small jump, these kind of jump blues swing settings. I thought were really, really attractive for the guitarist, to have a horn section like that. So, and I was also really, really into writing music and orchestrating and arranging. So it felt like that was something I could do. And if I wanted to put a group together to play a gig, it wasn't so cumbersome that it would be impossible and hard to get people motivated. This was something that if I found the right amount of right people, the right players, that this was something I could do. So that sort of just coincided with the first time that I had the opportunity to record. There was a small label operating here in Los Angeles called Mama Foundation, and they gave me a chance to record an album, which I did, and I just included my friends at the time and some other people who I didn't know but really respected. So, like at that time, Brad Meldau, the great piano player, was living in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I had known him since college. We didn't go to the same school, but one of my best friends at the school that I went to had gone to high school with Brad. And so we sort of naturally all became friends. And I got to know him later after graduating from college in New York. And then we both came back to LA. So he was around, and I just loved him so much. And so he played on the album, and a great bass player, Danton Bowler, who was here in LA, just tearing up the bass, and Willie Jones the third on the drums. So these were friends who just played great. I was lucky to have Pete Christlieb on that album. I wanted to have a horn section that could really handle the parts. So anyway, I don't know if I have to enumerate everybody, but a real mentor to me that was on that first album was Benny Wallace, another great tenor saxophone player. So I just, worked within the realm and the community and the sort of the milieu of people that I was knowing and inspired by, and made a series of 3 albums with that band for the Mama Foundation. So that would take, like around 2000. And then not long after that, I ended up starting to play with Diana Krall, and also finding myself wanting to do other things. So subsequent albums, I started playing a lot with an organ trio, some guys that I loved, Mark Ferber and Joe Bagg here in LA.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to document that, and made a couple of albums with those guys for a little audiophile label called Groove Note, and did that, and then began to start playing with Diana Krall. And then I think, through the sort of the middle part of the 2000s and up till now, it became this real, not gradual, a real, I think, in a sense, sort of dismantling of whatever I thought to be kind of a more really jazz identity, and opening doors into other kind of sounds and rhythms and influences into the music that I made, which I'm very happy to have taken a path that to me just feels like kind of a constant opening. So I would think, if people who are listening, they hear the records, that's what I think they'll find. They'll find a person who started kind of with a little bit more limited means, and although I was super creative and super inspired, and I had a huge amount of energy, and I just worked all the time, and I stayed up very, very late, but that first band, I feel like in a sense it sort of fit within a kind of a rigid framework, or a more rigid framework than what came later, and the process for me since maybe 2004, 2005, 2006 was opening myself up to a whole myriad, a real panorama of other sounds that might be possible for me.
Mm-hmm. I did the deep dive, and I listened to a bunch of stuff, and I even I sort of searched you out on YouTube, and every once in a while, I also catch these occasional blips that you put on Facebook, like maybe a video that's not for a record label or something, but it's just like what you're thinking at that moment. And sure. I just think it's really interesting that you're even putting that stuff out there at this point. I mean, these are like bedroom recordings on top of a really, pretty intense, record of, how do I say this? Yeah. An intense track record of putting out like big stuff. And, but you're just like open to putting it all out there now.
Well, within some limits, I don't know. Some people are quite motivated to put almost everything out. I love those little moments where just somehow I'm thinking about something. Usually when I've turned the phone on, it's either I'm exploring an instrument that's either new to me, or maybe it was an older instrument that I've had for a long time that I'd stopped playing, or a song or a feel or some kind of idea that I find, knowing the people, one of the great things about the internet, I know I'm not the first person to say it, is just this kind of, as an artist, musician, any kind of person that is putting something out that goes to an audience, is you start to get a sense of what the audience that listens to you is super interested in, and one thing I've noticed is that people who are interested in me, or who follow me, or who listen to me, sometimes it is those really little things, like sometimes just the tone of a certain guitar, or a certain kind of a feel, or to the real nerds, maybe some kind of guitar move that I'm finding open something up for me. Like, oh, if I'm feeling that compelled, sometimes that's a really good time to just put those things, to put on the phone, and record it and not think too much, just do it, because people tend to really find something there. I think guitar players, people who sit in their rooms a lot and practice and are trying to get together. I think we all struggle with a lot of the same things. And so maybe to find somebody that you really admire or listen to, or, you respect what they do, to see them kind of finding their way through in a raw way is good. So I like doing it.
Well, I got to tell there's audience, if you're out there, I think there's some clips of him playing his Telecaster. I think it's in your house. I don't know, but yeah. It's so intimate, and it's such good evidence of your harmonic sense. And like, I can hear the voice leading and what you're doing, and or when it's going sideways a little bit and how you pull it all together. It's really it's really cool to hear. Well, anyway, that's probably not what you wanted to talk about all day here, but I just thought I'd mention it. I wanted to ask you one other question just while I'm on it. I found a tune on YouTube called I think it's Hymn, Hymn.
Yes.
Is that an original tune?
That's a song of mine.
Uh-huh. Did you write all those arrangements and everything?
I wrote that arrangement. So that's that song we recorded with my 9-piece band on, for me, what to me feels the most fully realized of my writing for that particular instrumentation so far, this 9-piece group. And actually, what happened during the trajectory of having that band, the first 3 records that had sort of shifting personnel, but after I finished those 3 records, a certain core group really evolved and made itself kind of plain to me. So it was Mark Ferber on the drums, and a great bass player, Polish player who's lived here in the States for many years, Darek Oles on bass, Donald Vega on piano, Mark Ferber's twin brother, Alan Ferber, on trombone, great trumpet player, Gilbert Castellanos on trumpet, Matt Otto on tenor sax, Adam Schroeder on baritone sax, and Matt Zebley on alto sax. And that became like a band, and we did a ton of gigs. And so that album, which we made, which was called Power of Nine, I think reflected, like, to me, what happens when you start to get a real band in place, and kind of a tribe, and everybody thinking and working really together without even needing to say it, towards the same goal, towards the same purpose. And so that album includes that song, which is called Hymn, which to me was, kind of a reverential, almost gospel piece. For me, I have no problem saying the things that I steal stuff from. The main first little few note motif is straight out of John Lennon, straight out of I Dig a Pony from Let It Be. And, because the song, it's in 3/4, doom, 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 and then dig a pony is how that song goes. But mine then veers off. But it was like, I love to, little motifs will take you someplace new. So, I love that piece. To me,
those harmonies are so tight and beautiful too. I mean, there's just something about them that's just outrageous. I heard them and I couldn't even believe it.
Thank you. Well, and it was an exercise for me to find, because I wrote the song, and I wanted to make a song where the improvising that happened in the song would arise naturally in places in the song where it needed to be, rather than that somebody suddenly takes a solo. So the way the arrangement is written, there are these sort of spaces that each person sort of emerges from the fabric of the arrangement and is able in their way to comment on what's happening in the music without it becoming their solo, which I don't know, to me that's become such a huge part of my music. This idea that the especially in jazz, I'm so interested in if you can really marry the aspect of improvised performance with what's written. If you're a composer, that becomes for me, it's become one of the most central things. How are you going to get that thing to fuse like a dovetail joint, Yeah. So that the integrity and the kind of the structural beauty of it is like one thing. And it's not easy to do, if a jazz soloist suddenly takes a really dazzling solo, you really can't fault that solo, like even if it sort of doesn't follow from the composed idea, you don't worry about it. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of the records that I've listened to all my life have that. Maybe there was an arrangement and this person takes a solo, and if you really listen to it, you go, well, maybe that solo didn't have to be there. Maybe the composer didn't need to leave space for a solo there. There's many reasons why, it maybe doesn't need to be there. But when Johnny Hodges plays that solo, you don't worry. Johnny Hodges is a terrible example because almost everything Johnny Hodges plays is completely in context, on point, great. He doesn't showboat. He doesn't grandstand. He never plays too fast. I mean, he's the wrong example, but the point being just that I think it's kind of the problem for a jazz composer it's the thing that you need to come to terms with, and that I'm always working with. How can the improviser be given a context to make a statement which will allow him to really stay in relation to the context and to the idea. And so that song that you're talking about, I think it was one of the first times where I feel maybe I started to get closer to that. So, and that's a lot of heady stuff. I also think it's really beautiful, and I'm glad you do too. Yeah,
well, I mean, just on the surface, it's beautiful, and I guess hearing you, I mean, I listened to it and I thought, just the structure of it is really fascinating to me. And I guess I kind of get what you're saying about how sort of the improvising sort of emerges out of the way the song is written. Instead of you saying, hey, hold on, I'm going to give you like 32 bars here to do something. You like it somehow it pushes the improvisation out. I don't know if I'm explaining it better or worse than you, but I guess I'm trying to echo it back at you. And I hear what you're saying. I encourage all of the audience out there listening, go look this up and check it out because it's worth it. I want to circle back to some of your most recent album in just a second, but I thought maybe it would just be sort of helpful to understand your depth, like some of your work as a sideman. And I'm actually not quite sure if sideman is the word, because if you stay in a band and hold a regular chair for a long time, does that make you a contributor? I don't really know. Anyway, so who are some of the people that you've worked with that sort of help sketch out what you've done? Not as a leader, though.
Well, very, very early on, growing up here in Los Angeles, I got to know Harold Land, who was one of the first people who employed me and gave me a few gigs. And Harold Land, if you have jazz fans in your audience, which I'm sure you do, even if they don't recognize him by name, they probably have heard him play, especially in the great Clifford Brown, Max Roach, sort of the seminal Clifford Brown, Max Roach quintet albums. He played tenor sax in that band, and he later on went to kind of sort of change his approach, and he was just a deep, deep musician. He was a friend of my family's, and became kind of a mentor to me, one of the first people that I was able to get to know in a way that was like mentory, which, and Billy Higgins played in his band, so it was hugely meaningful to me. I didn't know that later in my life, hands down, that I would feel that Billy Higgins is my favorite drummer, but he's definitely my favorite drummer of all time. I mean, he's just my favorite drummer. So I had that experience quite early on of playing with Harold Land and Billy Higgins. Later on, towards college, I got to know this tenor saxophone player that I mentioned a little earlier, Benny Wallace, who's from Tennessee, who made a couple of albums for Blue Note in the late 80s. One was called Twilight Time, and the other was called Border Town. And they're these kind of really special records that kind of fuse Southern honky-tonk New Orleans music with like very, very sophisticated jazz. Twilight Time had the most amazing band because some of the songs was just a quartet of Benny Wallace with Eddie Gomez, Jack DeJohnette, and John Schofield. But the rest of the album, and the part that excited me the most, was the part that had Dr. John on piano and Stevie Ray Vaughan on guitar and Ray Anderson on trombone. And Benny and Ray would do these kind of wide harmonized lines. And so I literally, the first time I heard Twilight Time, I was driving with my mom here in LA on Ventura Boulevard. We had been somewhere, I don't even know where we had been, to get some dinner, but this music started playing, and literally it was so amazing to me. And there used to be a Tower Records over by Van Nuys Boulevard and Ventura, and I made my mom drive me to Tower Records. So they back announced the album. They said that was Benny Wallace with his new album, Twilight Time. And so I said, Mom, we got to go. I need that album now. I need that album. So we went to Tower Records. I bought it on LP that day and became obsessed with it. And I became really, a huge fan of Benny Wallace. And when I was, when I had enough education, gone to college, Benny Wallace had actually moved to Los Angeles to score films. And so I went to hear him play at Catalina's, the old Catalina's on Cahuenga. And I had I'd seen him many times when he'd come to LA, but I'd just always introduced myself. I never, just as a fan. But finally, once I'd sort of gotten out of college, I went to him and I said, I'd really, really like to find a way to play with you. I've learned your music. I know your songs. Maybe I made it known that I wanted to sort of be a part of his world. And that really ushered in, a lot of years of doing various things in the kind of the late 90s. And we made a beautiful project together honoring Coleman Hawkins during his centennial year, which was it's already probably 2004 or 2005 was his centennial. I'm not exactly sure, but we made an album with a similar kind of little big band, making Coleman Hawkins music where I made the arrangements. And so Benny, all of this is to say, I loved the fusion in Benny's music of kind of the high and the low, things that were really like rhythms and feels and grooves that you might hear in a bar room, it's somewhere in the deep South, fused with, or Texas, fused with like really, really amazing harmony or amazing melodic sense. And so he's been a mentor to me. I learned a lot from him, and I'm still inspired by him. I've played with Diana Krall since 2001. I had no idea that was going to happen. I had known her since maybe the late 90s, and I was, sort of friends with her and Russell Malone, who I would see, when they'd come through town here, or if we'd be on a festival together. And at a certain time, I was playing in John Clayton and Jeff Hamilton's big band, and she came to do a show with the big band, and it just happened to be at a time when she was thinking about doing a live recording, and she wasn't sure who she wanted to have on guitar. She knew she wanted to have Jeff and John. So at the rehearsal for the gig that we played, which was her show at the Hollywood Bowl, the Clayton Hamilton big band was backing her up. She came over to me and she said, it's great to see you again. Hope you're well. And you sound great. And, just was wondering, if I would ever want to call you for any gigs or anything like that, would you have any interest? And I said, sure, absolutely I would. I'd love to play with you. So the very next night, she invited me to come to Paris, and so the next night at the gig, we were playing, and after the gig, she came and she invited me to come to Paris and make this live record with her that we did, which was called Live in Paris. And so that particular show really was like the first time I'd really ever played with her in any kind of small group situation. I mean, we had one rehearsal, and then we went and we did the hit at the Olympia Theater, and I think she liked it. We've been playing ever since, and really developed something together. I think at first I wanted to really honor the guys who I knew who had been playing with her. I mean, I'm a good friend of Russell Malone's, and I love Russell. And Peter Bernstein had played with her for a while, and Peter's one of my dear friends, and probably was, when I moved to New York after college, was my first big kind of peer hero, somebody my age who I felt did what I wanted to do on the instrument. And so he had played with her, and another really great player named Dan Fanley had been playing with her. And so, I wanted to kind of get there and honor what these guys had done, but also play my own way. And I think as I've gotten to know her over, 15 years, we've really developed our own little ESP and timing. And, there's just all kinds of stuff. I mean, I love that when you have a colleague who you develop with and you grow with and you you kind of get your language together for the thing that you do. So, I mean, I'm happy to be, if I'm a sideman in that or I'm a contributor, no matter what, it's been a super meaningful relationship for me. I feel like she's respected my voice. She's respected, the way I play and the way I like to breathe with the music. And she's found many ways to, make me sound good. And hopefully I make her sound good. So, yeah, so those are some. And then there's been a lot of recordings, sort of one-off studio work with Bobby Hutcherson, which is really, really dear to my heart. One record that I got to do with him. Several projects of standards produced by Tommy LaPuma. So there's one that we did with Willie Nelson, who's truly one of my lifetime heroes. I mean, I've been listening to Red-Headed Stranger. That was one of my mom's favorite albums when I was a kid. I think Red-Headed Stranger had to come out in 1975. And I loved that album. So cut to, 30 years later, and I'm able to sit in the room and play standards with this guy. So that was special. And Tommy LaPuma and Diana Krall produced an album for Barbra Streisand, which was also fantastic. I got to orchestrate and conduct the orchestra for one of the songs that we did. And we did also an amazing project with Paul McCartney, all of old school standards, songs from the 20s and 30s. And so, all these things have kind of contributed to what I do, sometimes you just, and then there's all kinds of other records. There's things for my friends, people like Alan Ferber and Donald Vega, I think are just massively talented people. And so, I'm just lucky to be doing that, to do all those things in one mix.
It sounds like you run in a big, good circle with all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I feel like, so I don't want to get too far into this interview and not ask you about your newest album. I feel like we need to unpack it, Frogtown, which features, of all things, you singing, and I guess when I listened to it, the songs had these really vivid stories. I don't want to say it's like a complete departure from all the other things you've done, because as far as I can tell, you're always doing something different. So why should something different make it? How is doing something different if everything's right. different? I don't know how to explain that, but I get. But what I do want to ask is, one, my God, did you just feel naked using your voice? And second of all, where did all this change come from in general to sort of switch over? Tell me about that album and what that was like to record and why you did it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a real left turn in terms of the conversation, because I guess the main theme, or one of the main themes for me, is this kind of idea that I'm sort of stretching out of slightly, self-imposed slight limitations or frameworks that kind of felt to me, you just outgrow certain things, I guess. And so one thing I learned about myself, I'm 48 now, through my, mid-late 30s and then the last 5 to 8 years, is that like, there's so many different musical sounds, so many musical sort of pathways that have inspired me. And so one of the things that I wanted to do in my own recordings was give a voice to that. And that just became, I started self-releasing some recordings around 2008. And that's been one of my goals, is that each thing that I would do, you would know the through line through kind of the musical sensibility that's in the music, but not exactly that there's a kind of a exact linearity from project to project. But during that, I think the thing that I saw that became really compelling to me, when I felt my music was the most communicated the most to people, to me and to other people, was when it seemed to tell stories. So even going back to that song that you asked about, the sort of the gospel-y tune hymn, this idea more cerebral about kind of fusing all the improvisation with the composition, that's kind of a cerebral intellectual thing that you have to grapple with as a composer. But the end result of that to somebody who's listening is a kind of a complete story, a complete unfolding of an event or a narrative. Even if there's no words, there's some kind of sense really of beginning, middle, and end, and of completion and narrative. I think that when my music's been the most successful, that kind of center to the music really seems to come through. And when I was in grade school, middle school, high school, college, I sang in bands. I always loved great songwriting. I mean, I'm sure I picked up the guitar, because of Bob Dylan. I just wanted to play Bob Dylan songs. I wanted to play Beatles songs. I really liked Joni Mitchell, and I liked the other bands, from when I was a kid. I liked Kiss, and I liked Fleetwood Mac. Which bands isn't so important. I loved Hendrix, but all that is to just say, like, I wanted to sing and play guitar, and I did that through college, and then I moved to New York, and I kind of stopped that because New York is sort of this mecca for instrumental jazz musicians, and I just sort of easily fell into playing instrumental music. But as this other thing grew up in the last 8 to 10 years of feeling most present when my music really embodied kind of stories and narratives, it became evident to me that I was at least going to try to write some songs. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. Songs with words, I mean, I didn't know how I was going to do it, when it was going to happen, if I was going to need to collaborate with other people to write the lyrics. Because one of the things that I hear people who play instrumental music say a lot to me is that they can't write lyrics. And I can totally relate to that feeling, because when you get so used to not, in your musical activity, not using words, you start to think that you actually couldn't do it. And maybe one couldn't. I mean, there's maybe some people who really don't have the ability to do it, really find themselves kind of blocked when it comes to words. I don't feel that way with words. I mean, I really like words, and I like to write, and I always loved poetry, and I read a ton, and I love lyrics, and I have very strong opinions about when a song is when lyrics to a song are good and when they don't work. So I guess I didn't know when it was going to happen, but at some point there were going to be some lyrics to my songs. And so this album called Frogtown arose out of just another little phase of my development where I had decided that I also wanted to play with musicians who weren't just jazz musicians, that I felt like musicians who were coming from, that sounds bad when I say weren't just jazz musicians. I mean to say, like, musicians who came from other disciplines and other walks of life, that they had something really great to contribute, and that they had some insight into this thing that I'm talking about. When a song really stays cohesive and reflects a narrative, that it really can communicate. So I started playing with people like Jim Keltner. I had played with him on some records, and we started to develop a kind of a rapport as we would play. Mike Elizondo is another person who I'd actually many years ago played jazz with, but had gone on to become really more of a pop music producer. And he'd played bass with Ry Cooder and many people. But he had that kind of a foundation in jazz, but also a real sensibility for other types of music. And so I started just kind of playing with other musicians that weren't always jazz musicians. And this got me thinking about songs and the kind of songs that I could do that might be a little different or take me someplace else. So they were all the songs that I began to write, in the last 5 years or so, were these kind of vehicles to just explore that. And a few of the songs ended up having lyrics, and that felt very natural to me. Just I had stories in my mind, or I saw something on the street corner that inspired me, that all I had to do almost was kind of spit back out what I had seen, and I suddenly had a song. And so I found that to be really refreshing. And other things were a little more personal. There's a song on this record which is called Our Affair, which is very much about my father and my mother and their relationship, and also his particular sort of past growing up in Mississippi and having to leave Mississippi because there wasn't really much there for him, and how that kind of led him to my mom. And so, but I love stories. It's a story. It's somebody telling you something. It's a way to connect. So,
I'm so glad you mentioned Our Affair, because one, the tune feels great. It's got this, I think if I remember correct, sort of a big waltz feel to it.
Yeah.
And it's just the story is captivating. Like I actually wrote some of the lyrics down because I wanted to ask you about it, because I thought, well, first I sort of felt like maybe I was in your head and I shouldn't have been. As I was listening to it, like, this stuff feels really personal. So that was about family to you.
Yeah. I mean, my dad died in 2014. He was born in 1918 in Mississippi. So, he was 96 when he died, and he had lived a real long life and seen about as much change as you could ever imagine a person seeing. If somebody was born in 1950, and I don't know how things are going to change in the next 30 years, but I don't know if it. I don't know. I think the world in 1918 is so much different from our world now. And as he really came towards the end of his life, he shared a lot about growing up, and he used to tell me all these stories about the people that he would encounter, and the towns that he lived in, and the places that he went, and it meant a lot to me. He was able to much more spend time in the realm of memory than in the present day. He didn't really have a long period of dementia. He had like a real short few months where it started to kind of crack up, but it cracked up, and then he would be like 100% again. But still, he loved to just go back, and I don't know. It made me feel closer to him, and he spoke a lot about my mother and their relationship, and that song just came out to me. They were from things that he said, pretty much. And to have a way to kind of make sense of that all for yourself as the offspring of two people that fell in love, it's I don't know, meant a lot to me to be able to try to put that into words.
Well, like I said, it was a captivating story, and I think one of the lyrics is talking about like basically the refuge of their affair and the one that they made. And I was wondering, like, are you the one that they made?
I was.
Yeah.
You know, well,
it's a beautiful, man. Just beautiful.
Because I thought that he, there are certain things, you know, especially when you're with dads and sons, that is very difficult to talk about, and especially sensitive things. But he would go back to this time of, you know, before I was born and when I was born and when they were together, and he would just, you know, that my mom lived in a place up in Laurel Canyon, and it's also it gives away a lot to talk too much, but he would talk about being up in the canyon, and he would talk about, and it was so amazing because there's such tender things that he was sharing with me, which he hadn't really, you know, in his life, and you know, dads and sons, we always have that thing, like, wow, you know, I wish I could have talked to my dad about that thing, and there's about 10,000 things that I wish I could have talked to him about, but the fact that we got to kind of go into this territory a little bit, and he got to say what it meant to him to have had that relationship that resulted in me being born was huge, and how it related to who he had been as a younger guy. I don't know. So it sort of made one story, you know, and so.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I didn't know all this before I heard it. And it really communicated a lot of that, even though you didn't spell out in exact detail. I really got a sense for this story. So all I can say is well done. And I'm not really in the business of complimenting people unnecessarily. Like you deserved it. It was.
People, they'll doubt you, and they'll drain what's best about you. But with you, I stood so tall. Lost in the canyon, we made up our song. Far away from the strain of it all. And after all this time, I imagine that I'm still somewhere way back there, in the place where we stay with the one that we made from the refuge of our affair.
I love the realm of words, you know, and I love how it marries with music. I mean, it's just so it's like going back to what I was saying. If you have anybody that's like listening that you know, thinks that they might not have the ability to write lyrics, I think if they find that they do, it really can open doors. You know, it just opens doors into your consciousness and into how you feel about things. And maybe everything that you do from now on isn't going to have lyrics, but there's just something about what happens when those two things get put together that to me is really powerful, you know.
One of the tracks, I think it's Arcadia. The lyrics sketch out, you know, it's like it reminded me of some landscape of some other time and some less developed part of town. And, you know, by the end of the tune, I was wondering if the song was like about a mentally ill guy or maybe like a drug dealer from the 70s. I'm not really sure what it was about, but the way you use the concept of the lazy Susan, this thing that, you know, spins around, you put your spices or food on it. It's one of the lyrics in there. And I heard like lazy Susan to me is just tied to a time. Right. Just the words tie to a time, and the music employed it. So I thought that was really... How often do you get to compliment someone on saying lazy Susan?
And I won't say anything to spoil your, I mean, there's a story with that one, but I almost, you know, I love that. And I also love old timey stuff, things that seem to kind of evoke something that's older. So, I mean, the story that inspired that song is a totally modern day story. And, but I almost don't want to say anything. I just love that it's imagistic. You know, there's images there, and they allow you to kind of build pictures in your mind. I mean, gosh, and you know, the same thing can happen in instrumental music. It just happens without lyrics, and I think that's what's just exciting me so much these days is how that can happen and what you can do to make that happen in music, how you can kind of build a world or you can build a picture either with sound, you can build it with words and sound, you can build it with groove, you know, and it happens in so many different genres of music. I mean, it's just very exciting that's what comes, you know. I mean, it's, you know, there's all these great phrases that we have too. I mean, I'm thinking of that great thing that people say when they talk about Coltrane and sheets of sound, you know, and just what happens when your mind can build images and pictures or a sense of a kind of like, you know, sense memory or sense awareness, either just based on sound or the sound of a word, you know, it's really exciting, you know.
Well, yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying, and you know, I also got to say, like, I want to unpack every tune. We probably don't have time, but I thought it was interesting that because of your music education and I guess, you know, the sophistication of your playing and your musicianship, a lot of these tunes, which are narrative sounding tunes, they also have this interesting sophistication to them, which makes them almost like a little, I don't want to say highbrow, but like shabby bird. Like, I think there's like some 10/8 note phrases in there or some 5-note phrase. I don't know what it is. I didn't count it off exactly, but you know, like you don't hear a lot of tunes with that kind of rhythm figure to it. But it's still, you know, I didn't even notice it until I stopped to try and figure it out. And because the story behind it was just so wonderful, but I thought it was great that you could approach the story with a level of sophistication that, you know, maybe you don't get from a lot of people that are just sticking to the sort of the singer-songwriter genre or something. So I don't know. I hope everyone out there who's in the audience right now listening, go check out this album. I think you'll dig it.
I don't know where I saw something like very recently, read it someplace. You never know anymore where you read or saw something, because like we got these little machines in front of us constantly, and so we're flipping through something. But I saw something where somebody was saying, like, you know, I mean, you know, it might have even been on a comment to somebody's post where somebody was saying, well, you know, if you've studied something really hard and you've spent a lot of time on it, I mean, you know, and we're talking, you know, in the realm of tens of thousands of hours, if you try to do something else, like, you might be able to approximate it or something. This was the gist of this comment. But if you've really, really absorbed something and made it a part of you, it's very hard to kind of erase that for the sake of something else that you're trying to do musically. It was definitely a musical comment. Maybe the person was saying, like, if you're like a really good jazz player, then you can't go play 3-chord music. I'm not sure what they were kind of getting at. But you saying that makes me think, well, yeah, I mean, the things that I've absorbed, you know, whether it's a certain sensibility towards harmony or what I find compelling harmonically or rhythmically. It's just sort of always there. But I like the idea that it can become part of the whole of the thing rather than become the thing. You know, I mean, good. Some of the higher brow musical things that we've studied and spent, so many years and hours trying to get together. There's no reason to have those go away. But at the same time, I do love a 3-chord song or a 3-line blues song. That song that you're talking about, Shabby Bird, I consider that like a children's blues song. So it's got the same lyric structure as the blues. It's got 3 lines, and basically the first 2 lines repeat, and then there's the third line that sort of is the culmination of the 3. But it's not a blues, and it's another thing, and I don't know the meter of the song of the idea that I had worked with these little lyrics that I was working with, and they were playful like a kid's song. So it all sort of gets together, and it sort of fuses together, and it's beautiful, and there's interesting harmonies, and there's always I can't get rid of suspensions. So like not really not sus chords, but always like a note within a chord that feels like it has a tendency someplace else within a chord. Either the kind of classic 4th sus, but sometimes the suspension is in the bass, and so it seems to want to lead you someplace. So it might be a real easy triad, but somehow this bass is pulling. But none of that really matters once you're playing the song. So I like what you're saying, that hopefully you don't really notice it or pay attention to any of that stuff once the stuff's going. It's just it's playing and it feels good, and all the musicians that I'm playing with, God, all these things that they do, they just blow me away,
I think that's one of the best ways to sort of hear musical sophistication, is like when you almost don't realize it's happening because the music's so good, you're not thinking about it too much.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So we're running a little bit long here. I have a ton of questions to ask you. Tell me, can you spare some more time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. And if we have to, we'll break this up into 2 episodes or something, but I just don't want to stop asking you questions if you're willing to keep on talking.
All right, let me just
All right, episode 12, part 1 is coming to a close, but never fear, there is more to hear when part 2 drops in just a couple of days. In this episode, with permission from Anthony Wilson, we heard the song Hymn. If you swing by makemoveswithjohn.com and look for the blog posts on Anthony Wilson's episodes, you'll be able to find links to hear that beautiful tune in its entirety. In this episode, we also heard the tune Our Affair off of Anthony's album Frogtown. Again, swing by makemoveswithjohn.com, look for the blog posts on Anthony Wilson, and you'll be able to get links to that album Frogtown, as well as a bunch of other albums that Anthony's already put out. Okay, looking forward to dropping part 2 of this episode in just a few days. Until then, please take good care of yourselves and go out there and make some moves.